on the beach in Hawaii.
Welcome back. It is Smoking and Toasting, and we are bringing you show number 141. This show is all about craft beer, fine spirits, and hand-rolled cigars, and we're brought to you by B&B Butchers and Restaurant, 1814 Washington Ave in Houston, and the shops at Clear Fork in Fort Worth. Also by BB Italia and BB Lemon, and BB Lemon growing soon with a second location about to open in Houston, so excited about that. From Thrillist, which if you wind up getting on their email list, it's kind of annoying because you're like, stop sending me emails. Oh wait, I want to read this one, and it's one of those things like you want to like unsubscribe, but then right as you're going to do that, you go, oh, I'm interested in this article. So from Thrillist, 21 beers that you need to try or you need to be drinking. It's actually what the title says this summer. They start with Left Hand Brewing's Flamingo Dreams, and I have not had this, but it's a berry blonde ale, and I do love Left Hand. They have great stuff, and they are generally available in Texas, so you can find them in if you're looking for. From Houston, Spindle Tap makes the list. We've had them on the show before with their 5% tint. It's an IPA at 5%. So this is one of the, that new trend that we're seeing of very much more sessionable and easier to drink IPAs for the summer. Another one of those is from Oceanside, New York, Barrier Lomax. Isn't that a Dr. Seuss character?
That's Lorax.
Lorax. I'm sorry, I got that wrong. Yes. McKellar San Diego Raspberry Blush made the list, as did Second Shift Technical Ecstasy. It's a Czech Pilsner, but it comes out of St. Louis, proving that it's not just the big bad bud in St. Louis. There's some cool craft going on there as well.
Actual beer.
Fifth Hammer Fire and Rainbows is an IPA with oats and lactose. Comes in at 8%. It's from New York, New York. The Hitachino Nest Yuzu Lager at 5.5%. Yes, it's a fruited lager. I will point out, we tried their IPA, and both of us could not stand it. I don't know if you remember. It was a Japanese IPA.
Oh,
do you recall?
Remember that, yeah.
Had the little thing. Yeah, we were not fans. But yet I see this beer showing up in more and more like trendy bars and stuff. It seems to, not that I'm a trendy bar guy, but you know what I mean. It seems to be showing up in interesting places. Reuben's Brews from Seattle, Washington, summer IPA at 6.5%. New Belgium Brewing's The Hemperor. This is the
I've
one
seen
that's
that. I haven't tried that.
Well, now I have to say, while I love the smell of it, I didn't like the taste of it very much. It just wasn't. I just wasn't looking for that cannabis taste in my beer.
Right.
It was very aromatic and fragrant in a very pleasurable and positive way, but it wasn't to my palate.
Didn't translate to the flavor.
But that could be just me. Maui Brewing's Coconut Hiwa Porter. So it's not just lighter beers on this list, although porters aren't necessarily that big. In fact, it's an American porter. It comes in at only 6%.
I've had that.
It looks delicious. The Green Bench Saison de Banquever from St. Petersburg, Florida. Easier to drink than to say. The Bayern St. Wilbur Weizen. They're from Missoula, Montana. And the Night Shift Whirlpool from Everett, Massachusetts. It's a pale ale that comes in at 4.5%. A pale ale.
Wow.
That's actually, that's the shift we're seeing in the summer beers, is being able to come in at these lower ABVs and still be crafty and tasty and interesting.
Well, people want to be able to go to the park and session beers all day without, being 45 degrees by the time we're trying to leave.
P-Frem Nectarine Golden Ale at 6.9% out of Hood River, Oregon. Rothhaus Pilsner out of Germany is 5.1%. Cross Strain Hellas Creek from La Vista, Nebraska. 21st Amendment El Sully from San Francisco. Stillwater Insetto Dry Hopped Sour with Italian Plum at 5% from Stratford, Connecticut. As you can tell, we haven't heard of a lot of these. And we spend a lot of time drinking and searching for beer.
Researching.
Yes. Boulevard Tequila Barrel Lime Goza from St. Louis, Missouri. Highland Park Lazy Susan Peach Sour from Los Angeles, California. And I saved this one for last because this may be the coolest brewery name that we've come across in in a few weeks, especially if you're still in junior high school. The name of the brewery is Hoof Hearted. Hoof, Hoof, Hearted, Hearted. And the beer's called Are We Having Fun Yet? It's an American Pale Ale at 6%, but it's Hoof Hearted. And so there you go. That's, every now and then I'm still in junior high school. It just that stuff will just
Farts
work
are still
for me.
funny.
So, yeah, they always have been, actually. George Carlin had a great routine on that. Farts are fun. Farts are funny. All right, so which you want to taste first, Ian? I'm going to let you make the call on this. Do you want to go with the lot number 40 Canadian Rye Whiskey, or should we go right to the bourbon barrel-aged Imperial Stout called Infinite Wishes?
Well, I feel like if it's an Imperial aged style, let's go whiskey first.
All right, whiskey it is. This is the lot number 40, and so we're back to you, Sarah. Tell us what. First of all, that's a beautiful bottle.
It's
really gorgeous. You want to show that to Mr. Whirligig thingamajig there? It's a very tall one. You may be taking your life in your hands because if this whiskey were to fall and break, that would not be a good thing.
Don't try this at home, everybody.
Yeah. So
there's so much
I'm a
young
professional.
history to this whiskey. There's it's
young isn't always a good term to associate with whiskey, right?
no, but I mean, you'll understand when I get into it. It's as we started off our conversations talking about me going to travel the world and bartending in the late 90s.
Right.
So one thing I did learn, you were asking me about trends back then. Whether it was Sydney, Australia, Los Angeles, you name it, London, one thing in common in the late 90s in the bar scene was your cocktails were coming in glasses shaped like this.
Oh, yes.
They were
really
neon
trendy,
colored. They
really
were
trendy,
juicy,
sort of,
fruity, electric. Vodka, Cosmos, Sex and the City ruled
right.
the airwaves.
Yes,
Everybody wanted to have a cosmopolitan.
And you could get those little lights that you would break and put in there and light up your drink.
Yeah.
In the Canadian whiskey world back then, it was very popular. Even in the U.S. before 2012, Canadian whiskey was the number one selling whiskey spirits. And
Interesting.
2012, bourbon took over. So
Interesting.
consumption of Canadian whiskey in the 90s was quite heavy, especially in Canada, obviously, and sold in 160 countries around the world. But not well respected necessarily in the whiskey category, but people were consuming it. Now, imagine our master blender in the 90s says, hey, got this idea. I'm going to, I'd like to put out that rye that we blend into our Canadian whiskey. I'd like to do an expression of 100% rye grain. What do you think happens when we put out 100% rye grain in the late 90s?
Nothing.
I would imagine people didn't really know what
Rye
to do
wasn't
with it,
even
right?
a thing at that point.
People
Right.
did not know what to do with it.
Right.
In Canada, Europe, or the U.S., it failed so miserably.
Well, this is one thing. If you remember, Dave Pickerel, when he was on, talked about this, that if anything, his success was sort of guessing and anticipating that rye was going to make the huge comeback that it did. And when it did, he was kind of in the right place at the right time with a good product, and boom, it took off. But you're right. This would have been well before that resurgence.
well before that.
Yeah.
Now, where this did change after that, because it was one of those things, it didn't work, we decided let's not make this. They took it off the shelves. They stopped producing it. They used the rye to blend into all of our Canadian whiskey blends, but not put on its own.
Makes sense. Given where the market was, right?
Fast forward, early 2000s, New York and London, UK, bartenders start bringing back classic cocktails, brown, boozy stir drinks. Bourbon.
rye-
Bourbon
yeah,
explodes
yeah,
around
yeah.
the world. Irish whiskey makes a comeback. Japanese whiskey. Sex and the City is replaced with Don Draper and all of the
And
guys
Mad
on
Men,
Mad
sure,
Men. And
yeah.
every guy in a suit
With
and
the
tie wants an
old-fashioned,
old-fashioned and a martini at lunch, whether they know what it is.
Right.
And as a bartender or bar owner, you could make any menu you want, but if your customers aren't going to order it to eat or drink, you're shit out of luck. So when the consumer starts wanting these brown, boozy, stirred cocktails, bartender's a little ahead of the curve at that point. You know, bourbon's exploding. The rye movement. Someone at Corby Spirit and Wine says, hey, remember that 100% rye that failed so miserably a decade ago.
We should try it again.
Why don't we try it again?
Yeah.
And our master blender, Don Livermore, said, I'd like to take a crack at it. He was brand new as our master blender. He had worked at the distillery for years, but he had just come back from Harriet Watt and had his PhD in brewing and distilling.
Nice.
Very smart man. He said, I'm going to take 100% unmalted rye. I'm going to pot distill, or I'm going to column distill it. I'm going to pot distill it afterwards, discard of the heads and the tails, which essentially you're getting rid of the green grass and soapy characteristics. And you're just leaving the rye notes, the cinnamon, the clove, the baking spice, the citrus, the floral, and he puts it into brand new virgin oak. And now you've got this beautiful rye whiskey that's been mellowed and rounded out, vanilla, toffee, caramel flavors from the new oak. It's not so much of a punch to the face, which I like about summer ryes. It's more of a love slap, and everyone loves a love slap.
That's good. That's good.
We put this whiskey out in 2012, and you know what happens that year? It wins Canadian Whiskey of the Year.
Wow. Nice. Yeah.
And the rye, people's palates are going towards rye.
Right. People's things are beginning to swing back around.
It's fortunately won that accolade a couple times. Got Best Rye at the World Whiskey Awards 2 years ago. This is why I'm here. This is what I was selling. This is the whiskey that bartenders around the world right now for Canadian whiskey are grasping to, and they're putting on their cocktail menus and back bars. This is what keeps me going.
Interesting that it is.
This is so incredibly smooth, by the way.
This is crafted in small batches. Lot 40 is Canadian rye whiskey in its simplest form.
And that's it.
I love it.
I'll tell salespeople, they're like, well, what should I say? I'm like, 100% rye, pot distilled, new oak.
New oak. Yeah.
Anyone that knows anything about whiskey will get it right away. And
that new oak adds a little astringency to the aftertaste that's really nice.
And I just love the sort of cinnamon note that you get right around the middle. It's just wonderful.
And I mean, obviously, this is great. You want to make an old fashioned or a Manhattan, any classic cocktails. But it's elegant enough that if you want to mix it with some sherries or citrus and make a more lively, zesty, refreshing summer cocktail. But it's also great to have with a beer. And normally, if I'm going to have an American whiskey to sip on, it'll be a bourbon generally.
Right.
Not so much a rye. Rye's not something you normally sip on.
Right.
But this is fair enough. But this is a great rye to sip on as well.
I'm also thinking, and I've thought this about all three of these whiskeys, that this would pair well with a number of the cigars in my humidor.
Oh, yeah.
You know? I'm thinking of the A.J. Fernandez, the H. Upman by A.J. Fernandez with this. It's got such complexity in that medium-bodied thing, but I don't think either would cancel out the other. I think they would.
You know what I pick up every time I go to the cigar shop is one of those Southern Draw Cedrus.
Oh, you love that cigar, and it's quite good, and it would go great with this. You're absolutely right.
But he said it would go with beer, and I'm saying prove it. You've got that.
Oh well. As a matter of fact, and actually,
he's calling me out.
Actually, I'm going to hand this over to you because, as you can see, it is quite the wax-covered bottle top. This is our Imperial Stout.
You have your bottle opener?
I do. I have it right here.
Don't you want to show it
not,
first?
It's not a pointy-tipped one. So
I'm the professional here.
Yeah. Now, again, you do this at your own risk, Ian, because that is the only bottle of Infinite Wishes that I have. But it is.
It's okay. It's a porter. It'll bounce.
Actually, it's a bourbon barrel aged Imperial Stout.
Oh, sorry, it's a stout. It'll still bounce.
It'll still bounce, and it will no doubt be delicious. Now, I hope you've got some whiskey still left. Some of this rye.
Plenty in the bottle.
Yeah, there's a whole bottle of it here. I'm pretty sure.
All right. Well, you're going to have to do the honors there, and I will. You can either do that and pass it over here, or I will pass the cups to you, one or the other. Oh, so you're going straight through the wax with the.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to work.
Okay. I thought maybe. I know you're always handy with having the sharp instrument nearby. So. Yeah, I'm really curious to see how an Imperial Stout, which is going to come at a whole other, flavor profile, is going to mesh with this rye, which I'll tell you on its own is just fantastic. Oh, that's good. the key to the sound effect, by the way, is to let the cap drop on the table, but you amplified it by letting the bottle opener.
I missed the cap, so I
Drop
used the
on the
bottle.
table.
It was a
And
tube
I'm
bouncer.
I'm still
it
going
worked.
for
It worked
for
yes.
authentic sound.
Yeah,
here.
I like it. Yeah, because we have carpeting in this room, so we're not going to get much sound off of the floor. So, all right. And Ian, remember, we're pouring several of these now.
This
so,
is pouring out like fizzy coffee here.
This is
the aroma
this is
right
a
away.
very interesting. Torrance, California, is where this is from. By the way, so it's where this stout is from, and it just looks interesting to me. And I recall reading the bottle and appreciating what was there. But Ian, maybe you can refresh us with what it says on the bottle.
Let's see.
About this here.
Infinite Wishes Bourbon Barrel Aged Imperial Stout. Infinite Wishes is an inspired reimagination of a classic Imperial Stout. Decadently aged for 12 months in bourbon barrels, Infinite Wishes draws from the depths of nothingness and pours obsidian black with intense aromas of vanilla, cinnamon, and cooked sugar, finishing with the layered richness of a bourbon chocolate pie.
Wow. Well, it's interesting because the first thing I get on the nose is actually, and now that you said bourbon chocolate pie, it was kind of like ding, ding, ding. My brain like gets that. But the first thing I was getting was that sort of date and raisin and dried fruit thing that so many bourbon barrel aged stouts have seemed even stronger on the nose than this one.
So on the nose you get that, and you will get that right at the very beginning of the first sip, but then it immediately turns into chocolate and mocha, just like that.
Oh, you're so right.
Yeah.
You're so right. And I now totally get that. What did it call it? A bourbon chocolate pie?
Yeah. Yeah,
Which
and
is
it's
a
boozy,
wonderful
too. I love this.
Bourbon chocolate pie? There's nothing about that I don't like.
It's a perfect description for this.
I want to pet the bottle.
Oh, good. It's good that you're doing that. I think that's really important.
Do I have to save some of this for Johnny
This-
after show?
Yeah, you probably do. This I think
it's
is
delicious.
I think is a 2019 limited release from the brewery from not Infinite Wishes. I'm sorry, from Smog City, and it's interesting because Torrance, if I remember my California geography correctly, Torrance is close to like City of Industry and Riverside, that Inland Empire part of Los Angeles that is not the sexy part. Let's just say it's where the industry and stuff is. So they call this Smog City, which I think is perfect. But Dave, I see you're about to pair.
I'm gonna do some mixology here.
Oh, you're going to actually mix? In the mouth mixing, not...
Instant Boilermaker, right there. Rich rye with the chocolate bourbon notes.
I have
Perfect.
to tell you, they do go well together. They really, really do.
They do, all seriousness.
I love going from the stout to the rye. That works really well.
I will tell you this, that I find in general, too, rye whiskeys, and if you're not hip on this, but with medium-bodied IPAs, rye whiskeys go fantastic.
Yeah, there's something about those
flavors.
the way those flavors combine that really
So
works.
if you go into a bar
But
with
it's
that,
working with this.
that rye whiskey, pair it with a two-hearted ale, that would be fantastic.
Bell's Two Hearted. That's a great beer.
I have been noticing that in U.S. certainly, and parts of U.K. and a little bit of Germany, where even cocktail bars are putting together Boilermaker menus. And they're doing the nice beer list, and it's not always whiskey. It might be a mezcal, but they're doing different spirits to go with beers.
Right.
If you don't want to come and have a cocktail.
I'll tell you what. I feel like this is a golden age for spirits. Now, and it strikes me as really weird when I see articles that say that that consumption of alcohol overall is down slightly, and because it is such a wonderful time to be a fan of, you name it, whiskey, rum, tequila. There's so many amazing things happening. Craft beer, are you kidding me? Like, it's never been a better time to be a fan of beer than it is right now. And yet, it just seems like, I don't know, people always romanticize being born like back in the olden days. Give me right now. I'll take right now, because all of the stuff that I love, yeah, all the stuff that I love is happening right now, and it's really just really tremendous. Now, the Canadian whiskey, how is it on the rise in the U.S.? I mean, I think generally all whiskey is on the rise right now.
I think it all is. It's funny you ask. I don't have statistics or a piece of paper in front of me to prove it, but talking to some of the heads of the companies and the bosses that like look into all the numbers, we were in some meetings last week and someone brought it up. We were talking about our fiscal is July 1st, so we start our new year every July 1st. And everyone's excited for next year because apparently Canadian whiskey is on such a rise in the U.S. alone right now that a lot of brands are like trying to get some plans to strike and get out there. And we've been here for a few years and noticing the difference in sales has been incredible. I mean, working with companies like Hoadley & Co., who's been, former Anchor distillery or brewery, taking care of these brands have been incredible. Like getting it into back shelves of bars, it's been fantastic.
I think raising general awareness that not all Canadian whiskey is blended whiskey that you just keep in your freezer,
right?
I think makes a big difference too.
And I'm guessing in many ways that's the sort of central part of your job is to educate people about how much really great, well-crafted whiskey comes out of Canada and why it's not a category that people should ignore if they're fans of the spirit. You know?
Absolutely. And I mean, as an ex-bartender, spirit geek, everyone knows me. I don't sugarcoat, and I tell it like it is. I'd like to say that every brand of Canadian whiskey is starting to get innovative. A lot of brands are, and there's some incredible stuff coming out. And that's what we need. We need every brand, not just ours. We need everyone to raise the category.
It totally raises the bar for everybody.
And I would say, John Hall gets credit, the man who came up with 40 Creek in the 90s, of being one of the first innovators. Don Livermore, our master blender right now, he's certainly getting credit. For being one of the more innovative whiskey makers in Canada. And there's quite a few other people that are starting to follow suit. Again, people are changing their ways of things, but it's whiskey, so it takes a little while. Like, if there's many micro distilleries opening up right now across Canada, putting out some great vodkas and gins, as we all know. And I know they're laying down some whiskeys, 'cause I know these people personally, but we probably won't see this stuff for another 5-6 years.
Right, because of
so
the
it's
aging.
like, it is coming.
You can't put
it's
out
coming.
an aged whiskey if you started this year.
Exactly. So it's coming in, and that's where we're kind of a little ahead of the game, those 1.6 million barrels.
Right.
We got some cool stuff happening. We're working with amazing people in the U.S., but yeah, simply put, 5 years ago, coming to the U.S., I would go back home with my head a little low.
Yeah.
And think like, I'm not even seeing my brands, let alone any Canadian whiskey in back bars. But I said this yesterday, and it's probably comes off as a little cocky or arrogant, but it's like I've been fortunate in my career that like I get to be one of the many judges on things like 50 best bars in the world and the Spirit Awards at Tales of the Cocktail. And
Does Thrillist call you for these lists?
they have not yet. Probably wouldn't want me. But the cheeky part is when the lists finally come out now. Like I'll look at the world's top 50 and go and kind of smirk and go, oh, Lot 40's on their cocktail list.
Yeah.
Lot 40's on their list. Oh, it's on their back bar. And I'm like,
totally.
This is where I was like, 5 years ago, I couldn't
great,
sell it into anyone. But now some of the top bars in the world have it on their cocktail menus.
So, last question about the industry here. We see, the statistics and the stories that obviously Canadian whiskey is on the rise in the U.S. Bourbon is on the rise. All whiskey is on the rise. Gin, tequila, all on the rise. Craft beer is on the rise. So who's losing on the store shelves? Because you guys can't all be on the rise, moving more product than you were moving a year or two ago, without there being a give and take somewhere. Where's the slack being taken up? Is that something you?
It's a great question because I'm just thinking now. I'm like, I was out the other day and I saw many more vodkas on a shelf, and I saw
vodkas too.
Well, someone told me the other day there's now over. It's over 6,000. No, sorry, it's over 7,000 brands of gin are for sale right now on planet Earth.
Wow. So
I wonder what that number was 10 years ago.
Yeah. So just give you a perfect example. Right here in Houston, Eighth Wonder Brewing, which is a very good, very well-respected craft brewery. If you're a beer spirit wine store of any note, you've got to have their lines in there. There's something people come in looking for, asking for. They've now opened a distillery. They're putting out their own vodka, their own gin.
I have a bottle of their hop gin.
Yeah. So they're going to be coming in and going, hey, we want shelf space. And you can't say no to these guys because their beer is so important. So they're going to wind up getting shelf space. It's like something has to give.
Yeah.
Well, is it the cheaper spirits like we were talking about the
would hope so.
$7
Plastic
bottles?
bottles.
Yeah.
I would hope so. I mean, if you want to get into like sales talk, like anyone can see this. You can walk into a spirit store. I was at one in Dallas yesterday. And you go in, and it was a Canadian whiskey section. And obviously, I don't ever speak of other brands, but there were a couple brands where you're like, oh my God, they're taking up 3 shelves with one SKU, like one type of whiskey.
One whiskey, yeah.
And it's like, and then I got mine. I'm like, oh, there's one little row. And, and that's what it is. You're the little guy, you're growing. But it's like, I'm assuming when something comes in, they take away one of those. Because it takes up so much space.
We have seen that happen with beer. If you go to a Specs today, like the one where I shop down in Midtown, and you're looking for Budweiser or Bud Light, that is now a much smaller section of the cooler than it used to be. It still represents a pretty big amount of retail space compared to other, but they've made a pretty serious commitment to craft beer, and that stretches cooler, and then maybe there's 2 coolers at the end where you find the Bud and Miller and Coors and that type of thing.
It's funny in the stores that are a little more dedicated to craft products, though, that when you go, like if you go into those stores, even your downtown Specs and stuff, where is the Budweiser and all the macro brews located? They're the farthest corner, and it's the last few, and they're all kind of jumbled together in there.
I'd like to say it's because that's what they're the least proud of. It's the same concept as if I'm scanning the aisle for tequila, I don't spend a whole lot of time looking on the bottom shelf.
Right.
Because I know what's down there is going to be the more,
plastic
the
bottles.
The plastic bottles, the well tequila, so to speak. And that's
innovative,
not
because if you
for.
drop those plastic bottles, they don't generally break.
Right, you would think they would be on the higher shelves, but it would make more sense. But I was just going to say, I guess that's the same concept with the beer. It's like show off with your interesting and cool and sexy brands,
right?
And if you want Budweiser, it's in the back corner.
Yeah, it's over there. You know where it is.
Yeah, it's for the mini.
Yeah.
Well, there's one thing I've noticed that you're saying now that we're in this subject, but it's like specifically in the Canadian whiskey category. In the last 5 years, certainly people are educating themselves more on Canadian whiskey, becoming more aware of like whiskeys that are made in Canada but bottled in, let's say, different countries like the U.S. and sold, where certain spirit stores you go to are taking those American whiskeys and they're putting them in the Canadian whiskey section. Because if the label on the back says distilled and aged in Canada but bottled in the U.S., and I often wonder,
it as a Canadian whiskey.
I often wonder how those brand owners feel about that. If it was,
I will say it probably depends on what the whiskey is and where it comes from. If it's a Texas whiskey, I imagine they're not too happy about it because there's such a mystique, applied to being a Texas whiskey.
Right.
Same thing for a Kentucky or a Tennessee. But I guess if you were from, Oregon, maybe it's not.
Yeah, and
as
some
big a
are.
deal.
I've obviously looked at some of their websites, and some of them are very open, being like, "Oh yeah, we buy whiskey from Canada and we bottle it in this and put it in," and like, yeah, fair enough.
Not
all do, obviously.
We have a guy, a friend of ours, been on the show, the Tater
Wade.
Talk whiskey expert, Wade, and I love his philosophy. He's like, it doesn't matter, just be transparent about it. Just let people know where it actually comes from. If it's good, it's good. It doesn't matter how it was mixed or where it came from. But don't try to say you're X if you're really Y.
Right.
And that I think is a good.
Well,
is a good
I think
philosophy.
his philosophy is when you have a company that's trying to sell it off as a Kentucky or a Texas or something that isn't where it's from, then you're taking advantage of your customer at that point.
Right, and you're not being completely honest.
So with what you just said, I agree. I think if it's made in Canada and they want to put it on a Canadian whiskey shelf, I think that's fair enough.
And by the way, one of the best beers I've had on the show today was made in literally the grossest part of California that exists, and that was this Imperial
the
Stout
water.
from Torrance. I'm going to tell you something. This beer gets, like, every time I go back to it, it's even more delicious than it was the
The
last
only
time.
thing that beer is missing is some chunks.
See, that's where you lose me. That's where you had me right up until chunks. That's like me saying to you, all it needs is a little more hops in the
hops, right?
IPA. Yeah, so, Dave Mitton from Corby Brands. Corby is obviously a huge collection of brands, but you deal primarily with Canadian whiskeys and with being an ambassador for them, which I think is just an absolutely cool job. I appreciate our neighbors to the north. They're the ones we're not trying to build a wall to keep out. So, although
Not yet.
Not yet.
although back when Alan Thicke was alive, maybe we should have, done something to keep him from coming and going quite so
If
often.
you don't mind, I'm gonna have myself just a little more.
I think you should. But anyway, thank you so much for being
Thank
on
you
the
very
show and
much.
for
Absolute pleasure.
educating us about Canadian whiskeys. Because I have to be honest, there was a lot of this stuff I really did not know, and it's been fascinating to learn more and more about it, and to I know this might seem a little corny, but to be able to taste the craftsmanship that's going into these three whiskeys that we had today. I mean, these would go toe-to-toe with pretty much anything that's in my bar in their price range, I mean, very, very much so. So thank you for being on the show, and we'd love to have you come back anytime.
Anytime.
And do more tasting with us. We appreciate it. Ian, any final thoughts or closing words?
Well, frankly, Canadian whiskey is just one of those subjects where a lot of people think of just a few brands.
Right.
40 Creek has been on the front of actually making Canadian whiskey a real whiskey instead of just a blended whatever.
Absolutely.
And I think it's interesting to have so much craftsmanship coming out here and having the awareness of it. I think that's awesome.
Yeah, and it's been fun to help spread that a little bit.
Absolutely.
It certainly has. Thanks
you.
again,
Thank you,
Dave.
gents.
Thank you guys for tuning in for show number 141. I am excited about where we are headed next because Backfish Brewery is going to be on the show next week.
That's going to be awesome.
Yeah, so we've had their beers on here before. They're a huge factor in the Houston craft beer scene and in the Texas craft beer scene, and it's going to be really fun to have them on, and I hope they bring something really unusual and interesting. So we're looking forward to that. That's going to be next week's show. Thanks to our sponsor, B&B Butchers and Restaurant. Thanks to Adam on the Wheels of Steel, and thank you to everybody who came along for show number 141. It's Smoking and Toasting. We'll see you again next week, and I'm going to use the rye. Cheers.
Cheers. Cheers.
Well, Dave, thank you very much. That was a lot of fun and very informative.